Hello, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before we begin our presentations, for those who want to watch in English, our current session, the link is in the chat. Please feel free to make the alteration. Well, beginning our fifth special session of the Brazil Water Week. My name is Samanta Souza. I am the coordinator of the National Committee of Water and Sanitation Quality of ABES, and it's a great pleasure to begin this special session of the Brazil Water Week. Brazil Water Week is the largest international meeting on water and sanitation in Brazil, and it's the most important event of its kind in the country. And it starts next Monday on the 23rd and will go until the 27th of May in an exclusive online interactive platform. The website for the registrations are in the chat. If you have not yet signed up, don't waste any more time. Make your registration. It'll be 5 days with a great deal of content. During 5 days, we will have 20 sessions with specialists throughout all of Brazil and more than 19 countries about the topic of water and sanitation, and the content will be made available for the registered, those registered to the Brazil Water Week for 90 days. So beyond, as well as participating during the week, you will have a further 90 days to access the materials and the discussions made available during the event. Here in the ABES Saneamento channel, you also can participate free of charge in special sessions like this one that is happening today, and there will be others tomorrow. The special session now that we are currently beginning is about the topic of ESGs. We will take advantage of this very important agenda that has been addressed in sanitation over the last few years, especially driven by a legal framework. And in this session, we will take advantage of the opportunity to talk about the ESG index of ABES. ABES was always strongly focused, currently always very abreast of the sanitation issues as they arise in Brazil, and has seen through this legal framework and all these changes and accelerations imposed by the pandemic itself, and very rapidly over the last year created the ESG index. And we will take advantage of this moment to hold a debate about it. And we will receive our guests here. Carlos Schauff is our special consultant for ABES and PNQS, one of the idealizers of the ESG index that will bring his thoughts and present his material to us about it. Sandro Adriani Camargo, our coordinator of the thematic panel on indicators, which also played an active role in the construction of this index and was our partner with the National Water Quality Panel. And our very special guest, Claudio Ternieden, Senior Director of Government Issues and Strategic Partnership of the World Environmental Federation in the United States. So welcome, everyone. And I thank you all for having accepted our invitations. Claudio, thank you very much indeed for making time in your agenda for us, and to our partners, Carlos Schauff and Sandra, thank you very much indeed for being with us here today. For those who are watching, you can participate via questions in the chat. So during the presentations of our guests, you can write your questions in the chat, and we will transcribe them for the Q&A session at the end of today's session. To know a little bit more about our speakers, log on to the link below the video, and there's a mini bio of each of the speakers. And to make the first presentation, then, I invite Carlos Schauff, our consultant from PNQS. Schauff, welcome. The floor is yours. Once again, thank you very much for your willingness to be here. Thank you, Samanta, for the invitation. It's another opportunity to talk about this topic that's so important to all of us. This need that we have to be an example for the other sectors, we have ESG at the core of our operations. So I will share with you some material about our ABES ESG index. Our objective is to very briefly communicate to those who are watching us a perspective summary of this new tool that was created by many different persons, and this work with thematic panels that you participate in, and we with joining forces with various partners, and plus the panel of indicators and performance indicator panel, and the environmental panel, and the corporate governance panel, and our legal support. And with the review of other panels, we were able to have the launch of this index in December of last year. So our index has basically three proposals. The first proposal is to development, ESG culture development in the sector. Actually, rather a strengthening, I would say, of ESG culture, because ESG has been developed in environmental sanitation since for the last 10 years at least. So now with ESG 2.0, it has a stronger footprint. The second objective is to promote an exchanges of best ESG practices between our different organization in environmental sanitation and the entire industry sector. We want to have a new perspective on this. And finally, to enable the attraction of investments so that we can reach our objectives in terms of universalization, universal access. We know we have a long way to go yet in terms of sanitation in Brazil, and this will require investments, great investments from the private sector as well. And so the scenario inspires us and intimidates us to that we need to have a lot of work to do in ESG, and with investors demanding organizations and full ESG that is completely configured and vectored to ESG, the most modern ESG thinking. The controls are more severe throughout the entire world, especially in the United States and Europe. The consumers are more willing to acquire goods and services from countries that the ESG awareness is not reaching not just the investors, but consumers as well. And we also have a responsibility with certain activist organizations. We see in the first world that those who take the first steps in major programs aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals are those organizations in terms of that provide sanitation, and especially sanitation is ESG by par excellence. We have a scenario that's unique in Brazil, which is the design of the new legal framework for sanitation, which provides for universal access by 2030 as a major objective. 90% sewage treatment and 99% supply of clean water for everyone. We have a scenario of operators who need to provide high performance to win the RFPs. And we have operators that need spectacular levels of investment to reach the goals of universalization. We're talking about billions and billions in investments. And these investors will seek out the best prepared organizations and the most ESG responsive organizations as well. And also we have investors seeking opportunities, safer opportunities, and also in terms of governance. We have a scenario that we call ESG 2.0, which is a scenario where the organization becomes the influencer of its influencer community, this influencer organizations, and this external outlook causes to engage with suppliers and partners in its ESG journey, not just with its own employees, but also other people outside the organization, other companies even. And other factors that ESG 2.0 takes into account. One of them is very important, which is the diversity, as well as the carbon compensation and the responsible use by the consumers, because companies who practice responsible consumption need to be have much greater efficiency in the cash flow generation, because it will not depend on the irresponsible consumption to add value to the shareholders. We then had, in these last 25 years, in the last quarter of a century, I would say, of the environmental excellence, we had in 2022, we created the SLIM model, which we call the MEGSA ESG. And this model will provide the use of digital technology so that ESG be launched, in innovation, bring great driving impulses for the ESG 2.0. And so within this scenario, we launched the ESG image. Now, given that we are big influencers in our market, we have a vocation, a natural vocation for ESG. We are daily involved in people's lives. The organization, the operators of environmental sanitation, are conservationists par excellence. And they also take into account social environmental factors in their ESG. So what did we do? We got many people involved, many different countries, different companies involved with the group of specialists, and we created an instrument that would organize the actions of the ESG actions of the different companies in such a way that you can have a ranking. A ranking is a ranking rather is D- to A+, as a function of the type of ESG initiatives of various different topics that are provided for by the Sustainable Development Goals. And also this group took an inventory of the proposals inherent to environmental sanitation and connected to the 17 SDGs. And it provokes companies to take actions along these lines, organizing and prioritizing these ESG actions through a tool that is very simple to use. So the organization can take a small step and learning how that it works in our waterways, etc. And they can take some courses to understand this index. They'll call in for an audit to be audited to verify the information that they present, and it can with this have its get a certification. And ABES using this can disseminate best practices, so the ones that are on the level of excellence. And so we as an organization can respond, and we're willing to publish our index. So it's a very simple action. It has an instrument for evaluation of each ESG action. And this instrument will give certain weights or degrees of evolution in these actions in terms of potential, reach, in terms of evolution, if it's growing, if it's stagnated, if it's evolving, in terms of the intensity of the SDG goals, and then also in terms of competitiveness. So there's various factors that are taken into account to give a grade to each action. Each action is graded numerically through these different instruments. And then we evaluate in this instrument the global grades for ESG. For example, what is the situation of the governance? What are the risks? How is the strategic planning for sustainable development ongoing? What are these sanctions, especially or sanctions that the company may be receiving, and also the adversities that it has and that can be, or that have the potential to become sanctions. So this is evaluated and graded by our analysts, our ESG analysts. and they will produce a grade, and this grade then is made up of both the ESG actions and the quality of the ESG management, and will reach a grade, and that grade, for example, A minus, will bring opportunities to the system, indicates what can be improved and empowered in terms of ESG, so that this organization can be an example for everyone within the sector and outside of it as well. So basically, this is a summary of what I wanted to talk about. I would like to thank the review team that participated in this great effort during the second half of the last year, and they also help in normalizing things, and especially our beta testers for Saneamento, DESO, and Sabesp. Without them, we would not be able to assess the quality of our tools. Obviously, this model of ours is a model that is under development. We're making it available in the website to be used. That we can use it free of charge, but just if the organization is willing to obtain the certification, then they will pay a registration fee to support the whole process of the audits and analysis, etc. So basically, I invite you all to log on and obtain more information of this model. And I will also take advantage of this opportunity where we have our audience here to invite everybody to be part of this initiative of the PNQS, participating as a peer reviewer of our ESG 2.0. And it will be a records cycle, we're sure, with all these innovations, and we will receive you with open arms. Thank you very much, everyone. And I will close my presentation here and pass the floor to Sandro, who will talk briefly about our indicators. Sandro, if you please.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be here with all of you. I'm here to continue what Schauff has talked about. He already gave an overview of this methodology and of this model of assessment, which is extremely important for the wastewater sector. As a panel of indicators, we were willing to participate in this, and we wanted to make sure that we were working together. There are some important points to be highlighted when it comes to this model, which allows us to learn from all the expertise produced by ABES to assess the management of different organizations and to try and improve the management of organizations. Another important point is that it's quite a simple model. It's not a complex model at all to be put into practice within organizations, and it is also easily used by organizations so that they can create their inventory of actions, practices, and programs aligned with such an important topic as the Sustainable Development Goals. So here we have some important links that will culminate with a set of indicators to measure the performance of our actions and how all of these actions are helping organizations reach the results if they are using this ABES ESG index model. We have now a model that is different from other models that we had before. Now we have a set word of indicators that allow us to measure the performance of organizations and allow us to measure the performance of different organizations. Today we have a guide which is reviewed annually, and in its 21 version, it is composed of more than 100 indicators that are used for many different areas involving wastewater services, stormwater management, and this set of indicators contributes for organizations to have a benchmark, and this way it contributes in their quest to see if they are getting better results based on their actions and strategies. In this case here, we are talking about actions that are focused on ESG. So what happens is, in addition to the indicators that today are part of this guide.
Licença, desculpa te incomodar, só pedir para você segurar
Sandro, I'm sorry to bother you, but can you just hold your mic a little bit farther from your shirt, because we are getting a lot of feedback. Thank you. Well, in addition to the indicators on our guide, it was necessary, and it's still necessary, because we are talking here about a learning curve and about a lot of knowledge that we need to develop, and we need to have the participation of organizations using these instruments for their own assessment and also proposing the creation of these indicators. This is something that is going to enrich this process. During the creation of this model, we've had the opportunity of creating and learning about another set of indicators that we suggest organizations use so that they can measure their performance as well in such a way that they will know if they are fulfilling the goals of the SDGs. We know that for some of the SDGs, some organizations are fully committed to them. For example, SDG 6 regarding drinking water and sanitation is a very important SDG for some of these companies. But there is also a very strong connection with basically all of the SDGs, or at least most of them. We believe that our organizations can contribute to achieve them. Well, just to finalize, I'm going to highlight some of the indicators that are new in this context. We have a little bit more than 24 of indicators that are available as an alternative to organizations that want to measure some of their objectives. And these indicators have been recommended. They are a suggestion for some of these organizations, and they are aligned with each one of the Sustainable Development Goals. And they're a way to aid these organizations achieve these goals. We have an example here for SDG 1. The rate for social tariff is one of the indicators that can be used to measure if the SDG has been fulfilled, and this is a way to see if the purposes and the goals of the organization are in line with the SDG. For SDG 5, we have the participation of women in different boards. So we do have an indicator regarding the rates of women in these positions in boards and company boards. And for the SDG number 10, which is the promotion of diversity in companies, we have a rate to measure the amount of non-white population in a company. For SDG 16, which is related to the amount of people per performance, and we also have a rate that is related to performance, helping companies see if they are aligned with these SDGs. So we have 12 indicators that are of GRMD. We also have different indicators for water and water quality and wastewater services and universal access to these services. And for all of those that already know our guide, it is also available on the PNQS website. And for those interested in learning more about this topic, which is very relevant to our sector, I echo what Schauff said and recommend you download this material from the ABES website, the ABES ESG Index. It's a very easy read and it's very easy to understand, and maybe it's not very easy to meet all the guidelines that we have there, but it's very easy for you to understand everything that is being proposed, because we made sure that all of the organizations and all the individuals that are addressing these topics can learn from everything that we have written there. So that's all from me. I thank you so much for the invitation. I don't know if I should pass the floor back to Samanta or to Claudio to continue our debate. Thank you, Sandro. Let's pass the floor directly to Claudio now so that he can share his comments. Thank you so much for your presentation. Schauff, thank you so much for your comments. And now I'll turn it over to Claudio so that we can continue our presentations and move on to our discussions. I'm getting a lot of questions here, and we will address them during the Q&A session. Claudio, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandro. Thank you, Samanta and Carlos. Yes, I'm from Brazil originally, but in my day-to-day, I work with these topics in English. So I decided that I would make not have you hear my Portuguese with an English accent. I wouldn't subject you to that. So I figured I will do it in English and try to keep it slow, since in my heart, really, here I am a New Yorker, so you can imagine how fast I can speak. But it's such a pleasure to be here, and I am very honored to have been invited. This topic is extremely timely, is extremely important. It is great to hear that it is something that is important across the board, including in Brazil. I knew that from my work with Rio Water Week, the very first one. So it's really nice to be able to be back here to Brazil Water Week and be able to be part of this knowledge exchange. I think the words that we heard here, I think, Sandro, first of all, your point on metrics is absolutely right on target. And the work that ABES has done and the work that Carlos has done, putting all this together in a way that is much easier to use, it's tremendous. I spent some time learning about it, and I think it's great work. And you folks in Brazil have a big advantage in having that. So this idea of ESGs, I think in of itself, I think what Carlos said is absolutely right, exactly. That water and wastewater utilities, esgoto and águas pluviais, água de beber, all of them already have ESGs at their center of operations, if you will. It's a cultural thing. It's part of their culture. So embracing the ESGs as concepts is something that comes naturally to utilities across Brazil and across the United States, and I think across the world, because we are providing a social benefit, a public health benefit. We are helping the environment along the way, and we have to have a governance that allows us to operate sustainably. So this is natural to what utilities say. So that's an excellent point, Carlos. And then if you add with Carlos, if you add what Sandro said, that you have to measure it. Here in the United States, we have a term, and I think there might be a version in Brazil as well, a sort of a sentence that says, a phrase that says that if you're not measuring it, it's not getting done. So it really is. The other one that we use too is, if you don't know your numbers, you're going to work for somebody who does. So I think it's important, if you put those two phrases together, that we need to make sure that we understand how to measure, and we understand what those metrics are. And that is the area that a lot of companies in the United States are struggling with. Particularly, not so much in the environment. I think that we have a lot of experience on environmental metrics. I think we're getting better on social metrics. But where some of the struggles are happening, especially on some of the service providers like engineering firms, is on the governance side. How do you measure governance goals in the context of what a stockholder, for example, is looking for, or an investor is looking for? So that is very important. It's become a driver for a lot of companies and organizations to improve their operations from a day-to-day perspective. If you are actually a company that is operating all over the world, like Jacobs, for example, you have to spend a lot of time in a lot of resources to make sure that what you're doing from a governance perspective is consistent with what you're telling your investors. It's true for every company, but if you're operating in many different theaters, if you will, that has to be standardized, but at the same time, it has to be adapted. And that adaptation, where you maintain the principles that you set out to accomplish as a company, and then going and making sure that they're being accomplished across the board, that's a tough part. One of WEF's board members a couple of years ago was the sustainability director for Coca-Cola. And he really drove metrics into the sort of the thinking of WEF. And metrics have became very important across the board in everything we do. So it is essential that as organizations, as utilities, as service providers, as public health providers, that you understand where you stand and you understand where you're going. And I think the SDGs, the ESGs is the way to get there. Of course, SDGs are at the heart of this. Folks here, Sandro mentioned it, also Carlos mentioned it. So the SDGs are there at the drivers across the world. It's sort of the overall universal goals that everybody's working by. WEF is also part of the UN Water Partnership, which is working with other partners to try to increase access to water, especially under SDG 6, which was mentioned here as well. There are others that are part of it, but all this too comes into one thing: circular economy. So from a perspective of the United States globally, because WEF is a global organization, and my work with the global work here from WEF is to understand that the circular economy, and if you add water in the middle, circular water economy, it helps you understand where we're headed and what we're trying to do. Because it is, in the end, minimizing waste, making sure everything you do has a connection to reuse one way or another. We're finding out that WEF and our members, our 30,000 members across the US and globally, that having a set of objectives, which we do by looking at position statements. So if you go to our website under advocacy, you see that we have position statements on SDGs, where we say here are the specific things that WEF will be looking to under the SDGs to do. We have other position statements that help us, like climate change, help us keep targeted as a membership organization in what we are trying to do going forward. So some of these objectives are also part of what we ask of other partners, like manufacturers. In the United States, manufacturers that work on technologies that solve problems in water and wastewater, they too are looking for also have implemented ESGs because their investors want it, but also because it makes sense. And utilities have learned that, and they are partnering with these manufacturers to make sure that these goals and that these thoughts, that these principles are included in every way that we think. The diversity, equity, and inclusion programs also are contributing to that governance and social issues that we are thinking about. So we are starting to think about inclusion and diversity in every aspect of our business, the water business, the wastewater business. We're thinking about that when we hire. We're thinking about that when we train, when we develop talent. And we're thinking about when we invest in human resources. And all that is part of that thinking. But it's even though there is a separate push for diversity and equity, there is also that push that comes with being part of the ESG, which is the absolute sensible thing to do. But yes, business is driving that too. Wall Street has has very much paid attention to this. There is a lot more a requirement that one is reporting on these things. We're seeing reports to the Securities Exchange Commission. More and more, we're seeing reports that include some of that. There's also demands that it be included, these metrics be included. Also, development evolution of these metrics is something that is happening a lot too. And there's a lot of research too that is happening here and in Europe that you see, I think, come out with evolution of these metrics. And also, there are some activities in the past 10 years that contribute to a better understanding even of how to accomplish that. The Envision program, which is a program that helps engineers better understand how to work together and how to better do sustainability, and came from some studies and tools developed by Harvard. That is also something that WEF has incorporated, and the water module of that component is something that WEF has been working to update and is part of. So we as a sector, as Carlos said and Sandro confirmed, is have an obligation and we already do it anyways, but we have an obligation because it is what we are about. It is what our mission is. And WEF shares that sentiment, we share that thought process, and we share those principles. So thank you so much again for the opportunity to be here and to touch on some of these elements. But I wanted to make sure that there was a sense of understanding that we are in this together, that we have a lot of acceptance here at many levels because of the investors and because of the population or the populace here that finds that to be important. WEF is finding out a number of other sectors, and Carlos mentioned that a little bit, that the water utility, the water is ahead of it. But there are other sectors. We're finding out, for example, that the textile sector, who is a huge water user with some sustainability issues as well, they are working very hard to make sure that their supply chain is more sustainable, and it's more improves with technology and approaches and implementation approaches. And they are asking the question, how do we measure this? And then what is the best way to measure so that we can set up a benchmark? So the recently really interesting event in Amsterdam that I was able to participate, where the denim industry is looking to improve its footprint and be able to implement some ESGs. And ESGs is at the heart of their discussions. For 2 or 3 days, that's all they talk about, sustainability and ESGs. And it was very good to see that in a sector that has done a lot of work through the years. So and together as a water sector, and together with other sectors like technology and Intel, I think we'll be able to learn more and more. And ultimately, because we're improving how we measure, we'll be able to actually get it done and move away from this. If you're not measuring, you're not getting it done. So thank you so much for being here today, Samanta and Carlos, and I look forward to addressing some questions and having some discussions on bate-bola. Obrigado.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Claudio, for your kind remarks. Thank you so much to all the participants. We do have some excellent questions here. I will get straight into to meet the demands of our audience so that no question is left behind. Basilio from Dagnino is making the following reflection. I've read about the flexibilization of ESG by investors who put their profit as their greatest priority ahead of the meeting the ESG requirements. How do we keep your perspective and maintain the credibility of this instrument? This topic, whenever you mention to investors, they always look to profit, and there is a very strong dualism about ESG versus profit itself. So I just want to take advantage of his question to add a little more spice to it. The CVM here in Brazil published a regulation a little while ago, about a month or 40 days ago, Exactly, regarding the ESG practices, and it also brings the SDGs of the global agreement as foundation for this discussion and for this reflection for companies, also for companies who are listed on the stock exchange to present these practices. So in spite of this very strong duality, especially regarding with regards to the investors, the Brazilian equivalent of the SEC has already been calling us to look at this topic in such a way that ESG is not swallowed up by the investors. But I very well understand these worries by Basílio, and I wanted to bring to you and ask you what is your perspectives about this topic. And I would like to start with Claudio, and then we will hear from Schauff and Sandro. Is that okay? All right, then. Thank you, Claudio, if you please.
So, in the United States, one of the key principles that drives regulatory activity in the SEC side of the world is symmetry, right? If you're an investor, you want to make sure the information that is available as government and as a system, right? You want to make sure that the information available is symmetric, right? It's not asymmetric. That is, that some people have access to information that others don't, because that makes it that affects the credibility of the market. I think ESGs are really at the heart, from our perspective, at the heart of making sure sustainability information is used in a way that it contributes to symmetry. And if it doesn't contribute to symmetry, it then doesn't belong there. Now, ultimately, and I think that's a question here where we're getting to, ultimately, the driver of whether that will continue to be part of that information sharing to have symmetry is going to depend on what the consumer thinks. And the consumers, because of the way our laws are set up here, our consumers have a lot of impact. And now, sometimes one could say probably not as much as we like, because there are other markets, other places in the world that there is more. But because we also have a sense of, well, you got to be able to do business, right? But because of the sort of snowball effect that ESGs have had, especially because if you are an investor, think about the G. The G is governance. So you want to know that they're running their business in a way that makes sense. So it's becoming sort of like, oh, yeah, So I want to know as an investor if that business has a governance. And then if you're doing that, you're going to look at, well, what is he doing for people? Social. And what is he doing for the environment? Because destroying the environment in a situation where it isn't sustainable either. So I think there is some patience that we're going to have over time. I think we also have to make sure, like Sandro said, that your metrics are the right metrics. And I think it all comes down to making sure that you have the right metrics. Otherwise, it's going to contribute to that lack of credibility. So that's sort of the principles that I've seen in other places and here as well.
Muito bom. Vamos lá, Schauff, passando.
Very good. I'm going to pass the floor to you. Can you hear me? I'm having some issues in the audio, having some connectivity issues. So we'll pass the floor to Sandro while you try to resolve your issues there, okay? All right, thank you. Very well. Can you all hear me well? Yes? Well, this question is very interesting, isn't it? And additionally, about 2 weeks ago here in Porto Alegre, there was an event that is very important, which was the South Summit, which involved more than 20,000 people and many different organizations and startups. And one of the topics that was heavily debated was the topic of ESGs. And they recorded me talking with the panelists that said that ESG has to generate profits. So there is that issue as well. But for me, this issue is a little more complicated. It involves an entire ecosystem in which the organizations are involved. And in this ecosystem, we cannot look just to from the inward inside out. We have to look from the outside in. And Claudio highlighted an important factor we also have to look to, which is the vision of the client and the consumer, because that also they also have a very important role to play in this entire issue, because the more aware, the greater the awareness of the clients or the consumers from the point of view of the importance of starting to progress in a circular economy and move away from this linear economy, then from one to the other, moving from one to the other is a long process to be undergone. Not that we're not already on this road, but during the entirety of this trajectory that we need to undergo over the next few years. And I hope that in a very intense manner, very rapidly, I hope that these issues of ESGs will have will show the progress that is being indicated by the movements that are being generated within the financial sector itself, looking closely to the organizations to be able to release funds, financial funds to the investments of this organization. So there's an entire ecosystem in an environment in which we live that will dictate the speed of this and with which these things are going to happen. But in point of fact, we really do need to have a strong awareness of the governance issues so that this situation will move forward and that we do not find ourselves with this very important issue that is dealt with within this theme that we're talking about, which is the fake ESGs or ESG for marketing purposes, greenwashing, when it's not actually incorporated by the organizations. And then again, I think it's important to bring this, shall we say, this action of ABES, this actions of the panels and the different chambers here present, in order to bring an instrument with all the expertise that already exists to be able to help the organizations to contribute to these organizations that work in this sector so that they can map out their actions, map out their initiatives, and develop them so that we can truly avoid falling into the temptation of fake ESG or just greenwashing, to where something just becomes organizational propaganda or advertising. We need to have a very important balance. We can't forget about profit and think that profit is not important. It is important. It is vitally important as well, but it needs to be achieved in a responsible manner. And I'm just bringing one additional ingredient, which is the consumer, the client, and because those are the ones that we have expectation that can contribute with this entire process. Thank you very much, Sandro. I think that Schauff has been able to resolve his issues. This question is very important. We've been going through this since the first decade of the 21st century. Data of the great events and a lack of governance and organizations. We started at the end of the 90s with the dot-com bubble, and then we had the Enron scandals, and then we've had the derivative crisis, subprime mortgage crisis in 2008, and we have major traumas because we are abusing the creation of value for future generations. We're robbing from future generations to provide better dividends for our shareholders. We cannot create dividends that will generate costs for future generations. This transfer of income from future generations to the current generations that is done by our system, it needs to be have limits. So we're trying to establish some limits, and one of these limits is being very highlighted and defended by the UN. We know that the Science Chamber, which is our temperature since 1980 to 2020 has been has increased 1.5 Celsius and 1.5, and then we're at 1.2 in the last 5 years. So we have a great problem, and we are damaging future generations to generate profit. This awareness is being built. We're in a journey, and we're talking about a spiral, creating awareness in various levels of government and now clients. And we hope that we can attract these responses to this. An answer to this question is very difficult, Professor Danilo. It's very complicated, but we're working on it. Within the investors are preferring companies with ESGs. There's hundreds of thousands of companies indexed in the first world. There are more than 9-10 indexes, ESG indexes, and very rigorous. And the investors are demanding information from these organizations, and these market analysts are very perceptive these days because this awareness has reached the investors. Already know about this, and we have a difficulty in Brazil, which is most of our companies are not publicly traded. They don't have shareholders. They're not publicly held. So the fact that we have a large number of companies are privately held limits. It's even in the name LTD, limited. It limits the governance and the environmental issues. So that's our major challenge, and I believe as compared to the first world. But we are on the road. We're on the way there, and these questions help us think about better way to do governance. Thank you very much. Excellent. I think Sandro raised an important topic of greenwashing. We have to be very careful with greenwashing because the temptation the practice needs to be genuine. Whether it's diversity, true diversity, if it's participation of women leaders, that's real participation, and all the other topics that are so relevant, or as relevant as this one in terms of governance, it cannot be just fantasy or make believe. This is a concern of all serious companies that adopt the ESG. And I will just open a parenthesis here. Schauff, we've gone through some sanitation companies in Brazil that want to understand a little more about the project, and this is a topic that is recurrent when we talk with them about our concerns on the use of the tool as a good tool for measurement and management, as Claudio said quite extensively during his presentation, in terms of measure, control, and improvement cycle, has very much aligned with all this. There are some more things here. Basilio put in 2 further questions. I'll ask his question, and there's 3 more, so let's try to be very quick. One of them is that they mentioned that the use of blockchain to monitor the evolution of the ESG indicators was proposed in an article of the British magazine Quality World some time ago, and he wanted to know if that could be utilized as a solution. So using blockchain to monitor the ESG evolution. And there's another point that he raised here as well, which came from Claudio's presentation. Claudio highlights the importance of standardization of indicators for different organizations, because for each different organization can have different meaning and different forms of calculation. So I think we can tie this loose end with ESG. And so using blockchain as a tool for monitoring and using ESG index as a good starting point, the issue of standardizing the indicators so that there are not different definitions or understandings of them within the rating that we are proposing. Shall we go there? So I think Schauff will do Schauff, Sandro, and Claudio. In point of fact, not just blockchain, but other emerging technologies have been employed and continue to be employed throughout our infrastructure for measurement. And we are at the beginning. Our great challenge is actually to create compatible references. We look for a very standardization of indicators so that we can have refer back and translate our umbrella in ways that can be do different reference to different times and places in private sector companies and public government companies. So in Sandro and his group, that's where we do these challenging comparisons. So in this issue that is more conceptual of using technologies, naturally, we will demand a digital adaptation of our index. In the first version, we could in the future do that. Of course, this blockchain gives us much more information about the evolution of the sector as a whole, so that we can be an example for our objectives. With regards to what is the next other questions, Samanta, that was placed? One was about blockchain, the other was standardization of indicators. Yes, standardization. So it's answered. Our standardization allows us to create benchmarks. We try to avoid, we provide freedom to the organization to choose whatever indicators they want. It's freely choose, but we recommend that they use our metrics so that we can create warehouse of comparative information, which was the basis for our success in the Excellence of Environmental Sanitation Award. Sandro? Well, about this issue of blockchain, I am not a specialist in the field, but it is obvious that the more we progress from the point of view of the technologies to be able to monitor all the transactions and all of these situations in this world we're living in of adaptation, digital adaptation that serves as our daily reality as people, as individuals, much as to organizations and corporations that have a great deal to contribute. There's no question about that. Now, from the point of view of the indicators, which is a topic that I would address in some depth, I'd be very interested to do so in other digital topics, but we have built into this entire effort, we have more than 2 decades, approximately 2 decades of work with these indicators, working these indicators within this construction within the PNQS more specifically, and making available in a very agile manner, very flexible manner, seeking the most up-to-date information possible. And for this reason, we review this guideline every year, which provides a good, quite a bit of work. And I'd like to express my thanks for the volunteers involved and for the people who work within the Chamber of Indicators for their dedication and their their many hours dedicated to this reviews. We work with a number of various fields of knowledge throughout the world, and also those that are here in the measurement instrument in terms of performance in sanitation sector and other sectors as well. We look in the management of the organization as a whole. And this allows us, without beyond any question, allows us to make these comparisons so that we can have a database that is structured by organizations that submit to external audit and evaluation in various cycles, and allow us to have results to highlight the results. And there is a spreadsheet that's available on the website where we can see and compare oranges to oranges and apples to apples. And this also helps the organizations to in this measurement. And certainly our tendency is to evolve in this process that is being launched, that was launched this year to put in use. And we also will tend to evolve also with regards to seeking blockchain solutions, but especially in short order to have indicators that we look. This will become an obligation for companies. Companies will have to present this universal supply of water and sanitation. Absolutely, this will become a requirement in the future.
Eu ia passar a palavra para o Claudio.
So a couple of things come to mind. I think that when I think about technology and in its use, I think about this model that exists in racing. That is that you position yourself for the win at the curve, right? And then in the stretch is where you win. But you win in the curve, but the stretch you execute, right? So if you think of the pandemic as the major curve of our century, and how it changed the mindset of a lot of people. And we should really take advantage of that opportunity. We have tabulas rasas now. We have people that are more than ever, they have a clear vision that they might want to do something different. So a lot of times the problem with technology is not the technology, it's the people, right? So if we are in a place that people are more open, and you have a generation now that we have that's more open to change, we need to take advantage of that. Blockchain is one, artificial intelligence is another, and then there might be other things I don't even know anything about, because really smart people are working on them already. That will be the technology of the future. So when I think about data analytics and how much room and how much evolution has had in the water sector, and I had a stint in the defense sector in the United States where I saw things I could never imagine, things that in the water sector we were not doing or even conceptualizing. But here we are 10, 15 years later, we're doing. And I think that, again, going back to metrics and then applying technology and knowledge that we have, I think we will get where we need to go. But we have to have that open mind, and we must take advantage of that open mind. The timing is everything.
Obrigada, Cláudio. Vamos lá, a Marluza mandou
Thank you, Claudio. Marluza has sent 3 questions, and I will ask the 3 of them together so that we can optimize our time. Marluza Abreu has 3 comments and questions. One of them is, what are the considerations regarding structural racism, and what are the differences that we have in Brazil regarding ESG, the ESG index? If we are going to talk about greenwashing and social washing, how do we guarantee that through the ESG index we will identify if it is some kind of washing or not, both green and social washing? And finally, if there is some sort of rating for stakeholders. So in summary, looking at the ESG index, if we take into consideration structural racism and the different characteristics that we have in Brazil, also guarantees of assessment to make sure that we are not scoring greenwashing and social washing, and finally, the appreciation of stakeholders within the model. And I think that this question is for Schauff and Sandro especially. Well, it's a very interesting question. You've raised three very important points that we have under ESG 2.0. When it comes to diversity, in our index, it is mandatory to address this with organizations. We have definitely obligations and we hold the different companies accountable. And diversity is something that is very important to us. So we have an indicator for non-white, for the non-white population. And in this rate, we are including this indicator, we are including different ethnicities. We know that in Brazil, our society is different and it varies per region. We know that we have more indigenous people in the northern region, for example, and we have a larger Black population in the state of Bahia and in other states. We have a lot of white people in the south and the southeast part of the country. So our index is related and it's adapted to the distribution of the population, of this population across the country. It's not something that is done random. So we need to meet this goal and having also affirmative actions so that we can reach equality and make sure that we do have processes that will generate equal opportunities. So this way we can create a level playing field within our organizations that deal with wastewater services. Well, regarding greenwashing, I think that what you mentioned was very interesting. I think that this was one of the first prerequisites that we had during our first discussions. We were thinking about how are we going to have a greenwashing proof index. So we have created a rating that is taking into consideration how actions can potentially bring ESG benefits. So there is a grading mechanism of these actions, and these are called factors. So for example, an ESG action is then broken down into factors, and each one of these factors are graded separately. So if I have an external ESG action involving, in the case of the sanitation sector, 500 consumers, is going to have much more weight than an internal action with our own staff, because the staff is going to be much smaller. So the objective is to have organizations become influencers so that their actions can also attract their consumers to take part in their actions. So all of the different actions are quantified according to their potential to change their culture and their reality. And we have actions that are not only connected to racial issues, but also to greenwashing. We talk about greenwashing and we call this reporting responsibility. So these companies need to have transparency and they need to report based on accountability models. So we use international reporting models. We don't prescribe which model these organizations need to use, but we encourage them to use these reporting by giving them higher grades if they use these models. Well, regarding stakeholders, the SDG related to efficient organizations, and according to our model of excellence in our utilities, efficient companies are those that harmonize in a very efficient way the interests of all stakeholders. So we believe and we evaluate the E, the S, and G separately. Our index allows us to know what's your grade for the E, the S, and the G separately. So based on that, you can reinforce the actions that are better and that are doing better regarding their score. And of course that if you're not really involving your providers, you will have a smaller rating because you are an influencer in your chain of providers. And if you could be doing something that you're not, then your rating will also tend to be lower. So that's the way we do things, and that's how we have this multidisciplinary approach in terms of stakeholders. And now I'll pass the floor to Sandro. I agree. I completely agree with what he said. Maybe I could try and add some more information, but I don't think there is a need for me to do that. I think that we can move on. I agree with Sandro and Carlos, and I wrote down the word reporting. And there is also another expression that we use here in the United States. Light is a great disinfectant. So
muito bom. Gente, tem uma última que eu vou passar para o
there's a
Schauff.
last question here that I will ask Schauff, and as soon as you finish answering the question, I'll ask you to just give your final remarks. Then we'll move on to Claudio and Sandro. Rita is asking about the accuracy of indicators, the importance of the accuracy of indicators. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this topic. And I think that during the period that we have been here, I think the accuracy somehow has been addressed. But I want to make sure that Rita gets her answer. There are some other questions, but we are reaching the end of our session today. And I want to make sure that the three of you will have the opportunity to give your final remarks. So I will finish our session today with Rita's session regarding accuracy, and then I will move on to the speaker's final remarks. Thank you. Thank you for your question, Rita. Within our working group, we looked at the different stages of maturity that there is in Brazil. Brazil is a very diverse country. We have organizations that are still in the Stone Age in our country. We also have organizations that are extremely advanced. We are the third largest manufacturer of aircraft in the world. However, we still have some coal factories and very degrading work. So we have a very diverse scenario in Brazil. So we are careful enough and we paid attention to every different aspect, taking into consideration different actions regarding ESG. So we have a mechanism which is factor-based to also help those that do not have metrics, because we have difficulties when it comes to measuring a lot of things, and everything is measurable, and we need to remember that every measure are just approximations. There are no specific measure. Every measure in our lives are just approximations. So as we improve our measures, we try to get better, but it's never going to be completely accurate. So we have models for organizations whose actions do not have metrics. So we have a model for that, and we measure this based on factors and based on the characteristics of their actions. So these are the potential factors that I mentioned previously. So all of the actions within an organization are measured through factors or through their own metrics, the metrics that they present to us. These metrics can be of two types. They can be volume-based or quantity-based, and they can also be performance-based when you have different denominators. So we're not talking about quantity, but we're talking about performance denominators. So we are talking here about two different types of metrics. And based on this hybrid measurement system, we are able to capture the ESG potential of an organization. The companies that have performance-based metrics have a higher rating because they are at a level that is a little bit more advanced. for a set of actions. So they will have an advantage in this sense. But those that do not have these indicators are not at a disadvantage, because we have ways of qualitatively evaluating the potential of ESG actions and how they will potentially change the culture in our society. Regarding our metrics, we have also an auditing system. So our auditing system involves some indicators, and obviously we are not able to look at every indicator, but we do have a mechanism to analyze the accuracy of indicators and the origin of data. So the credibility of our index falls on not only the fact that it is a participatory methodology and consensual methodology, but there is also a very clear audit system that we use, a very classic system that we use as well. And I can see that there are a lot of different professors that work in this area here with us, and we use these amazing tools, and we welcome the use of these tools. We have a tradition in our country of really enjoying oversight. We love doing oversight. A lot of people think that the fact that Brazil doesn't work is just because of lack of oversight and not of lack of education. Everybody thinks that's what's missing in our country. If that was the case, I wouldn't see a silver lining. But anyway, we use the concept of really making sure that we track the accuracy of our data to make sure that our index is working well. Well, this is one thing that we need to do. Of course, that we are not going to find indicators for all of the different sanitation companies for investors. That's not why we're doing that. We do that for ourselves. We want to make sure that we can show other companies what we are doing as well. And as Claudio mentioned, we should be teaching ESGs at universities. We should really be talking about this. If we are doing mediocre ESG in our sector, imagine what will happen in other sectors. So we need to definitely step things up. And now I will move on to my final remarks. We are at our stage which is quite advanced. We have a model of excellence for waste and wastewater management, and is the first model that evaluates the potential of results. It does not evaluate what happened, but it will also evaluate the potential of results that we can achieve. We have a matrix for the potential of our different organizations, and with the same DNA has been used for the ESG index. So we are analyzing the potential of the SG of different companies. So when we flag that a company is a role model, it's not just because it had a good result in the past in its metrics, but because it has a strategy, a sustainability strategy that can potentially teach us. So we have this DNA of looking forwards and looking into the future. We do have this foundation as part of our model, and this foundation has brought us to where we are. This year, we have reached a record in the amount of applications to participate in our process, which shows how much of a credibility we have with other companies. And this also proves the quality of our professionals as well. And we also have a lot of volunteers working with us, which lends a lot of credibility to our company. And we also have the best brands in our sector as part of our panel of brands. We have very powerful brands that have been helping us and guiding us and volunteering with us. So I'd like to invite other Brazilians who, like me, are looking to change the level of management in Brazil. I am here with my gray beard, and I've been around for so long. I remember when I had a blonde beard, And now, as you can see, it's great showing how long I've been here. But what I want to say that I want to make sure that we can have you all participating in this process towards creating a world-class ESG. Thank you, Schauff. Thank you, Claudio.
Sim, muito obrigado. De novo, muito obrigado pela honra de participar
Thank you
hoje.
very much once again for the honor of participating today.
I would say that I would say that to the issue of accuracy, before I do my closing remarks, at least here, from our perspective and what I've seen, and also because, as you know, there has been unprecedented investment in infrastructure here in the United States. With the infrastructure bill that was just passed, there is $55 billion going to the water sector. Of course, the majority of it, 45 billion of it, is going towards replacement of lead pipes. But there is about 10 to 15, maybe eventually close to 20, but $15 billion going to the water sector. We haven't seen that kind of funding in decades. This is the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act in 1972 that changed things in the US and implemented a lot of what we now have here. Also, grants money came with it. And a lot of our infrastructure was built then through those grants and through that investment. Since then, that investment has been lower and lower and lower. So this infusion of money, and there's a reason I'm going to tie back to accuracy. This infusion of money means that there has to be tracking, right? Is it going to be a lot of waste? Probably. I hope not. There's a lot that we're doing in terms of oversight, the fiscalização, right? Oversight to avoid that. But there is also another concept, right? Money is the answer. Now, what was the question? So the question is accuracy. When there is investment happening, there is also cobrança de contas. And that is going to increase as well in many levels, because you have to report, you have to be able to get insurance, seguro. You can't get insurance if you're not transparent with what you're doing. So there is a direct correlation to how you're going to be able to spend that money. Also, you're going to have partners that are going to require, for example, the consulting firms that will be getting a lot of this funding, these consultants that will be getting a lot of this funding, they too are very concerned about ESGs. So them as a whole and as a group, as a sector in and of themselves, are very much driving ESGs in the United States, because they're going to be accountable in the transportation side. That's where the $250-some billion are going. The majority of the money that is in transportation. So you're going to see they can't play there and then forget water. They can't play in water if they don't have the ESG in place. So what we're seeing here is an investment by these firms and all the supply chain, an investment in having their ducks in a row, essentially, so that they can avail themselves of this tremendous investment. So it's funny that the prospect of fatura, right, is driving them to go the opposite direction, because greenwashing isn't going to play. Right? And there's a lot happening. Another way that accuracy is playing out is there was something, a Biden administration initiative called Justice 40. And what it is it's not 40% of the money going to environmental justice areas. It's 40% of the impact. So you have to show that the investment that you're making, that 40% of that impact is going towards environmental justice and communities that have traditionally been disenfranchised. So there is that accountability, is building accountability at many directions, both from a social accountability, a financial accountability, and also eventually a political accountability. So we see that to be an important component of accuracy. So in terms of a closure here, so I'll give Sandro time to do something, and so apologies. I would like to thank you again, but also keep in mind that I think there's so much to learn. Carlos said that Brazil still have a lot to catch up. Well, so do we. We have not invested in our water and wastewater for many, many decades. And now we're playing catch up. So the lesson there is to be doing along the way doing as much as you can, as opposed to do nothing and then have to play catch up. So I think that lessons learned, we can learn from each other. That's why this collaboration and this activity is so important. And again, thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to continue dialogue.
Sandro? Okay. Well, the first, a brief comment with regards to the what Rita's question, which is absolutely appropriate, the question of accuracy. We know that in spite of having controls and having making good choices, the perfection with regard to accuracy is very difficult to achieve. So an important issue that she highlighted is the issue of education. Is if we are based on that, if we base education which produces a culture, and this culture has to be a culture that brings us to try to show what we really have and what we really are, and not try to gild the lily or make things look like they're better than they are. And so for this instrument that we are talking about today, it has some aspects that are very important. And I believe Schauff already mentioned, but just want to remind you briefly of the issue of the factors that are used to provide a dimension of what we're measuring. And then you're going to look at that application of what you're doing is really having the impact to the small, on the small level and large scale within that logic. And there's also the issue of the results. And so there, the better the indicators are that are chosen for that, the better I will be able to look first internally as an organization. And then when I have, when I'm putting that into the hands of external evaluators, and we know, now let's be very honest about this process, we're talking about indicators. We know that when we want to measure a certain purpose, although you try to study and choose the indicators properly, it will very rarely meet that objective 100% of the time. So we try to find the ones that are the closest to producing what we want to measure, and then the purpose or fit for purpose or objective, or something along those lines. But it's also a learning curve involved, and we need to be willing to undergo that process. And finally, another issue that's very important within this process, in order for it to have this the whole seriousness and integrity that these process and accuracy this process demands, is having this step, which is the step of audit. So we understand that, not that we are starting from a very good, wonderful place, but we're starting, we have a very robust starting point for this process. So along these lines, we feel comfortable with regards to what is being done. And now, to close up at 3:30 or 5:30 Brazil time for final comments, I would like to thank you all for this webinar. It was excellent. It was very pleasant, and we've spent the whole time learning and sharing learning experiences. And I'm sure we could be here for another long while yet with the people who are here and the people who are participating, and that bring these excellent questions. And that could be, we could all sit around a table together and having these discussions, and we'd have great learning opportunities on every side. So thank you all very much, Samanta. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Claudio. Thank you for being here, allowing us to learn with you. Thank you. Thank you, Claudio and Schauff and Sandro. I would like to thank you all for being willing to spend your time to share your ideas and share your ideas. Claudio will speak soon. I've put in parallel with Schauff that I've seen great opportunities for us to hold in the New Orleans event. And let's talk briefly. And I would like to thank everyone who's participated in our live stream until now. This video will be available on the ABES YouTube channel. On the website, you are able to access the complete agenda of Brazil Water Week. And tomorrow we have the final session regarding the concepts of universalization at 10 a.m. And don't forget that the Brazil Water Week is coming on the 23rd to the 27th of this month, so that you can have the opportunity to get to know the various topics that will be talked about with the participation of 19 different countries in Brazil Water Week. From the 29th of June to the 1st of July, we will have the ABES, the Portugal-Brazil Symposium on Environmental Sanitation and Water. And the information is in the chat, so you can register and sign up. Well, we always want to do merchandising, advertising to invite all the participants to join ABES, as Schauff mentioned here, in the volunteer work promoting quality sanitation for all of Brazil and the development of the market, especially in a time when sanitation is a very important and relevant theme in the political debates in this year in Brazil, especially its election year on the federal and state level in Brazil. So thank you all who have been with us till now, and stay tuned both in ABES Connecta and in Brazil Water Week. Claudio, Schauff, and Sandro, once again, thank you very much indeed. Thank you to the organization of ABES that provided us this space to have such a rich debate as this one. Good afternoon, everyone, and warm regards.